the first thing that I do when starting any new project is to create a folder with folders inside for all of the different pieces of my project. This way I can keep everything all together and stay organized. So these are the folders that I typically need for an educational animation, but the folders that you need might be different depending on the project. Let's take a look at an example of a real project. So in this animation called How Kidneys Work, I have an After Effects folder, and that has all the different versions of my project file. And so for this, I'm incrementing the saves on this project file so that if something gets corrupt along the way or something gets messed up, I can go back to an earlier version. So it's kind of like a manual autosave, although I am also autosaving, which you can see I have this autosave folder. Also in this After Effects folder, I have any After Effects project files that I've imported from a different project. So this folder right here has pieces that I'm using from a different project that I'm going to import into my project file. So I keep that whole folder in my After Effects folder. Next, I have my Illustrator folder. If I'm reusing Illustrator files from project to project, like for instance, if a character is in multiple different animations, I always copy the Illustrator file and put it in the new project folder so that when I import it into After Effects, it's linking to the version that's in the project folder that I'm working on. That way, if there are any changes to one of the versions of the Illustrator file, or if things get moved around on my computer, there aren't any issues. Also, I have a characters folder within here because sometimes it's nice to just have all the characters together. This brings up a good point about naming your files. So it's really important that you name your file something that makes sense to you now, something that will make sense to your future self, and something that will make sense to other people that might need to look into your files. So one thing that I like to do is name things so that they'll be kind of grouped together when they're in alphabetical order here. So like I put all the characters in a folder just to keep all the characters together, and then I name them by their like kind of character or occupation first. So I would have all of the doctors named doctor and then their name, and then all of the patients, patient, and then their name, and so on. Also, I like to add master to the file name when I know that this is the character that I'm going to be rigging. So if I had like the character Greg posed in a different way, maybe he's sitting in a chair, then I would name that patient Greg sitting in chair or something like that. Next we have audio. And so in the audio folder, there's a bunch of other folders. So first we have music, pretty straightforward. We have sound effects. So this can get kind of like a big folder with lots of different things in it. And then we have voiceover and then project files, which is just wherever you edit your audio, the project files from that will go in here. And then the final audio tracks is really important because I like to have all of the final things that go into my animation. So as you saw with the other folders, like the sound effects folder, they can have a lot of stuff in them. So it's nice to just have the final tracks that you're going to put back into your animation in a folder clearly labeled. Also for my work, a lot of times we have to translate videos into other languages. So having the sound effects and music on their own file separate from the voiceover makes it really easy to add in another language. Then I just need these two files on top of my animation. Next we have documents, which is things like the script and storyboards. The out folder is for the final project renders. So I like to just have a version number. So I know that the latest, the biggest number is going to be the most recent final animation rather than naming things final and then final and then final. You know how that goes. The rough animations folder is for drafts of the animation or just test portions or scenes that I want to show to other people to get feedback on. Another folder that I don't have in this particular project but that I often use is called rendered scenes. And so this is for when you render out a portion of your animation, and it is the final animation but just not the full thing. It's good to store them in their own folder. That way when you go to render your final animation, you can just grab all of these rendered scenes, piece them together, and then your final render will go a lot faster. This can be especially helpful if you're working on a really long animation or something that's really render intensive, and we'll talk more about this later in class. Once you figure out the folders that you tend to use for a project, it's nice to have a template so that you don't have to recreate these folders every time you start a project. So basically all I've done to create this template is created these folders and they're all just empty. So then I just save this on my desktop, and when I want to go and make a new project, I just duplicate this and then rename the duplicate. There's one other thing that I haven't showed you about my template. So actually in my After Effects folder, I have an After Effects project file that's a template file. And so let me show you what that looks like. So this is my template file. It's pretty simple. All it has is some folders. The folder structure that I've created in my After Effects project file template are similar to the folders in Finder. So for instance, rendered scenes is where I'm going to export a piece of my animation from After Effects, keep it in this folder, and then import it back into After Effects and store it in this folder. Scenes will be the unrendered scenes, so the actual working project. And then elements are things that are going to be reused in different places. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. The folder labeled out is going to be those very final animations. So one other thing that you might want to think about including in here, besides just the folders, is any logos or disclaimers or anything like that that you use over and over. So let's take a look at a real project. So in this How Kidneys Work project, you can see that my folder structure is similar to the folders in Finder. So I have just the audio that I'm going to be adding to the final animation. I don't need to clutter this with sound effects because I edit all of the audio in a separate application. And then I have my out folder, which is going to be my final animation. So this is just the composition where I'm compiling everything for the final animation. And then in my timeline of my final animation, you can see that I basically have 3 scenes, which are these right here. The rest is just like controllers, some text on top, and masks, stuff like that. So these 3 scenes are stored in the scenes folder. So if we go into one of my scenes, these scenes are going to be made up of different elements. So my elements folder contains lots of different compositions and imported Illustrator files and things like that that are used across my animation, maybe once or maybe multiple times. So they could be used within different scenes or multiple times within the same scene. So basically the elements are different pieces of animation that may or may not be used multiple times. There's one more step that you can take with your After Effects template. If you want After Effects to always use your template when you create a new project, all you need to do is go up to After Effects, Preferences, and then New Project. And then you want to check the New Project Loads Template button and navigate to your template on your computer. And then just click Open. And now every time you start a new After Effects project file, it'll load up your template with all of the folders and any assets that you've left in there. We've talked about staying organized with folders and with project files, but now let's go into the project files and talk about how to stay organized. The number one thing to do within a file to stay organized is to label your layers. It's so easy to do, but also so easy not to do. But really, taking that extra second to label your layers will save you so much time in the long run. It's also really helpful to have a naming convention that you always use when you label your layers. So for example, one thing that I like to do is label the thing first. So for example, this eye is going to be labeled eye, and then any attributes about that thing will go afterwards. And I like to even separate those out with a little dash because I think it just makes it visually easier to see and then easier to find what you're looking for. So I always label things like eye left or eye right, or there's the main seed, which is just called seed, and then the shadow on the seed is like part of the seed, but it's also its own thing. It needs to be on a separate layer for animation purposes. So I've labeled it seed and then shadow. So the thing and then any features of the thing. Here's another example stolen again from another one of my classes that's a bit more abstract. So it would have been really easy just to leave all of these different boxes called like shape 1 or layer 1, layer 2, but that would make it really hard to find what I'm looking for. So instead what I've done is I've gone in and labeled all of the layers. So I've labeled what they are first, so rectangle, and then D for dark blue, and then I've also given it a little description as to what is on top of it. If you have a bunch of layers like these lines that you want to name something very similar, like line 1, line 2, line 3, there's actually a plugin within After Effects that can do that all at once, so you don't have to sit there and label each line individually. And that plugin is called Motion 3, and I cover it in my class about plugins. So in rare cases like this, I would just leave all of these layers unnamed, and since they're the only thing that's unnamed, they're easy to find. And then I would name them in After Effects. Another thing that I like to do when naming characters is to name the characters left or the characters right. So this hand is on my right side when I'm looking at the character, but that could change if the character spins around or something. So I always label things as they are in relation to the character. So the character's right or the character's left. Another thing that you can do to stay visually organized, especially when you have a lot of layers in After Effects, is to color code your layers. So in order to color code the layers, all you have to do is click on the little colored box here and then choose your color. So for example, for characters, I like to have the face be orange, the body yellow, and then left arm green, and so on. And it's the same for every character, so it's really easy for me to find what I'm looking for. Going back to this more abstract example, here's another reason why you might want to color code your layers. So for this, obviously there's so many different layers here, and each little kind of rectangle is its own kind of vignette. So I've colored these all accordingly. So for example, this whole thing kind of goes together, so all of these are blue. Or all of these ones are, I think this is called seafoam, which is this whole little box here. The anchor is all green. So color coding your layers can help you group things visually in your timeline. Another reason why it's nice to have all of your layers color-coded is because if you select the color coding box and then go to select label group, it'll select everything that's colored with that color, and then you can easily manipulate all of those layers at once. You can also come up with certain colors that you always use for different kinds of layers. After Effects already does this. So for example, if you go to New Null Object, null objects are always red. So maybe you like to have your controllers always be red, or your masks always be dark green, or something like that. Another example is that when you make shape layers, After Effects always makes those layers blue. If you want to change the default colors for different kinds of layers, you can do that by going to After Effects, Preferences, and then Labels. And then you can rename the colors, or you can even choose new colors. And you can choose what kinds of layers get what colors. I'm going to keep mine on default so that I don't make things uber confusing for you.